Awesome. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Has everyone had a good day so far? Let's try that again. Has everyone had a good day so far? Excellent. Some energy in the room. I like to see that. Well, my name is Sam Jarman, and today I want to talk to you about the future, specifically the future of apps. I'm also at Sam Jarman on Twitter, and I definitely encourage you to take photos and tweet throughout this presentation. I would love to keep the conversation going once we're finished up here. So who am I? Who's this young 23-year-old talking to you on the stage like he knows something? I'm a full-stack software engineer at Carnival.io, which is a sail-through company. I've been making apps since I was 17. Before I left high school, I had 15 apps on the store with close to 100,000 downloads in dozens of countries. I then went to the University of Canterbury down in Christchurch and did a Bachelor of Science with a first-class honours in computer science. But I'm not just in front of the screen my whole day. I quite enjoy running around Wellington's gorgeous waterfronts where I live now. I enjoy acting. I like to get up on stage and make stuff up with the Wellington Improv Troupe. And, I like to also write for my blog and talk shit on there, really. This is the full version of my profile picture. My girlfriend told me to include it because it points out the fact that I was sitting at our ping pong table during the photo shoot. Classic startups, right? So to give some context to this talk, I want to talk briefly about the history of apps and sort of where we've come from and therefore where we're going. So who remembers these things? Hands up. Excellent. So who's still writing code for these things? And who's part of the company selling software for this version outside? Cool. Yeah, so this is Windows Phone. So this is WinPad. This is Pocket PC 2000, 2001, 2003, Windows Mobile 6.0, 1.3, I think, and then Windows Mobile 6.5. Massive software user base, pretty big in the enterprise space back in 95 to 2005. And obviously Windows 6.5 is still running on a bunch of devices. It's pretty exciting. However, in 2007, Steve Jobs got up on stage and proceeded to tell everyone about Apple's latest invention. It was a mobile browser, a music player, and a phone, all in one. It was the iPhone. And it was something quite revolutionary for the consumer market. Sure, like Windows Phone and BlackBerry had the enterprise emailing physical keyboard market down, but this was something quite cool for the consumer market. So it sort of made people think about smartphones as really just regular phones, and the term of smartphone now is almost becoming deprecated because of it. Android had always been around. We just didn't really hear about it until they started copying Apple. They originally looked like this. This is the T1, launched in 2008. Physical keyboard, Google Maps, that sort of stuff. The physical keyboard disappeared as the iPhone started proving that we didn't need a physical keyboard, and then it started this kind of awkward race with Apple on features, which it currently convincingly wins, let's be honest. So originally you weren't able to actually develop apps for the iPhone. Apple's company line was mobile web apps. That's what you should do, write them in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and deploy it, and your users are totally going to be all right with the poor performance. This wasn't good enough for all of us, so we started doing something which was called jailbreaking. So jailbreaking was surprisingly gaining root access to your own phone and then being able to sideload software onto it. The software, you had to basically guess the APIs, and a lot of developers were able to successfully guess the APIs based on the API from the Mac OS X operating system at the time. We had a huge explosion of jailbroken apps. The jailbroken market is still going strong today, but it really got to start back then in the 2007-8 sort of era. And some of the jailbroken app success was actually a lot closer to home. There was a company down in Christchurch called Polar Bear Farm. Has anyone heard of Polar Bear Farm? Awesome. So they were the first ever iOS app development company, a company whose revenue came from selling iPhone apps. They were the first in the world, in New Zealand. I was pretty happy about this. It was founded by two guys, Guy Horrocks and Leighton Duncan. Leighton Duncan now works at Xero as the head of mobile, and Guy Horrocks is my boss. They made the apps that, in their words, Apple forgot. And this was things like searching your own phone, taking videos, tweeting, what other stuff? Converting between units. So they wrote apps for their own and also wrote apps for clients. They wrote, for example, the first version of Tap Tap Revenge. So that was the jailbroken market, pretty successful. They made a lot of money, and it went into funding Carnival. So in 2009, Apple released the official iPhone SDK, and that created a slurry of apps, and the App Store kind of went nuts. We had 200,000 apps uploaded in the first 6 months alone. There was like Doodle Jump, Tap Tap Revenge, Angry Birds, and it was super easy to make an app. You just download Xcode, and then you just start writing an app. Some guy did that. He downloaded Xcode. He got the white default screen. He put an app icon on it that said Flashlight app, put it in the store for $1, and made millions of dollars. The Flashlight app, super basic, did pretty well for itself, and it made the rest of us a bit jealous. In February 2010 at Mobile World Conference in Barcelona, Windows Phone 7 was announced, and we're all pretty impressed by Windows Phone 7 as well. Did anyone try Windows Phone 7 back in the day? Hands up. Awesome. Yeah, it was really nice. I used one for quite a while, and it was a super nice operating system. I still prefer it over Android, funnily enough. So that's largely where apps have come from. Small pieces of software, largely from messing around in the consumer space, and they're just plain old kind of consumer apps. You sort of open the app, you perform your task, close your app, and you're done. You just repeat that over and over again, and it was a bit average. So what's coming next? I want to talk about where we are right now. And the main thing where we are right now is what I like to call context-aware apps. So context-aware apps are capable of three things. They know where you are in terms of your location, physical location. They can do macro locations such as GPS, cell tower, that sort of location, know your country or city. They can know where you are inside with beacon technologies and that sort of stuff. They know who you are, so who you are as a person, not necessarily your demographics, but what your preferences are, what your behavior is inside the app, how you've been interacting with this app before. And finally, they try to make a stab at what you want to do. So based on the information above, they sort of optimize the journey inside the app to offer the path of least resistance for the tasks you want to do. So it's pretty exciting. So just some examples. So here's me trying to get to Batoni inside Google Maps for iOS. So transit apps are a perfect example of context-aware apps. They know where you are, where you want to go, and how you typically get there based on your route. So the bus, the train, Uber, whatever. They can also do some more what you want to do sort of stuff and warn you about traffic or construction or any other warnings that need to take place and more. So it's pretty cool. So this is Swarm. Does anyone here use Swarm or Foursquare for checking into places? Yeah, cool, a couple of hands. So it lets you check into places. This is me checking into work, writing my talk on a weekend because I had fun things not to do. The app will prompt you via push notification to check into places as you get there, and there's a lot of gamification, other mechanisms built in to try and get you to check into place. And it can also prompt you where you've been as well. So if it sees you went somewhere but you didn't check in, it can actually ping you a day or so later and remind you to check into those places. So a lot of context-aware stuff there, where you are, what are you doing, and then it can give you tips based on where you're at the location, that sort of stuff. And it can sort of, once again, a really good kind of context-aware experience. But not everyone's heard of it. Has anyone heard of this next app? Who's here who has heard of Pokemon Go? Excellent. Who's played Pokemon Go? Keep your hands up. Awesome. So in Pokemon Go, you can actually walk around the real physical world and collect Pokemon. You can also gain control of landmarks called gyms, and you can also collect items of other landmarks called Pokestops. It has a AR camera mode where you can hold your phone up to say like a fire hydrant, and there'll be like a Charmander sitting on top of it, and you can flick a Pokeball up to try catch the Charmander, which is pretty cool, but it's still not really AR, it's doing no tracking, but it is AR in terms of the map and the real world overlay, so it's pretty cool. And I think the fact remains that Pokemon Go is one of the best AR apps ever made, period. It is a fantastic AR experience, and it's really sort of introduced the regular consumer market into what an augmented reality app is and can be. It grew to the daily active user count of Twitter in just a few days, and it hasn't really fallen off that much since. Nostalgia combined with AR combined with general awesomeness sort of made it an app that will go down in app history, even general history. So it's a pretty cool app. So that's context-aware apps. They feel natural, intelligent to the users, and the experience is tailored for the right person at the right time and the right place. So care has to be taken with context-aware apps not to feel creepy. Arguably, this slows down what we can actually do with the apps because we can actually get pretty good insights about people without them realizing where that data's come from. But we could do so much more, but we have to tread really carefully and respect the consumers when we're doing context-aware apps. Consumers have shown this, and they are willing to trade privacy for value, but you've got to make sure that you've got that balance right. And the companies that do it wrong get named and shamed pretty well. So there was a retail company in the States a few years ago who famously started sending a teenage girl some adverts about new babies, expecting a new baby, and her father got the leaflet before she did, and he didn't know, and she didn't know, but she was indeed pregnant, based on shopping habits and patterns and stuff like that. So we've got to take care with what we're trying to sell to people or how to increase their experience. So yeah, value first, always value first. So let's get on to what we're here for, the future of apps. So what is the future of apps? Where will apps be in 5, 10, 15 years' time? The future of the apps is this. Interactions outside your app. Now, that sounds counterintuitive, but let me explain in the next hour or so. More and more, we'll start to use apps from outside. Back in 2009, we downloaded the app, we opened it, closed it, moved on, repeat. Nothing linked together, nothing flowed between apps. Data was inside the app and it didn't talk to anything else, but now we can do so much better than that. In this talk, I want to cover some of the common interaction types of interacting with outside your apps, available on all platforms, 3 platforms. So first up, let's talk about deep linking or universal linking. Deep linking is the act of bumping yourself out of one app into another app, and the destination app starts with a certain set of parameters, or it starts in a certain state based on the leaving state or the origin state. I do believe that deep linking will be the future of a lot of interactions between apps, and it's starting to occur all over the place. So who understands what this does? Hands up. Excellent. Cool. So this is Mail.to. It'll open up, when you click on it on the web, it'll open up your mail client and start an email to me. Feel free to email me about stuff, whatever. The Mail.to bit does all the work. It sends you in the right direction. Mail.to was invented in 1998, but we've come a little bit further since then. So here's a simple example of Airbnb. Nothing radical here. You have a place to go, and you can tap and open up Apple Maps or Google Maps. Obviously, you choose Google Maps because you want to go to the right place. The map app starts with the direction filled in and ways to get there, as shown in the previous example. So I recently went to Australia's Red Centre, where my brother works as a charter pilot. We were flying over Ayers Rock, you can see up here. So Instagram and Layout are 2 apps created by Facebook, and when you press the small button here, you go from Instagram to Layout. I think I'm in the way, sorry. Once inside, you can choose the photos you want to make into a collage, and you press back and you go back into Instagram. So we've deep linked out of Instagram into Layout and back into Instagram, keeping the context and data, the experience at a high value the whole time. So it makes sense when the companies make both the apps because they can just flawlessly work together, as you expect. But what about 2 unrelated apps? So Google Maps for iOS, and probably Android as well, and Windows Phone, can deep link you straight into Uber. So it's technically an ad at this point. Companies like Button does ads inside your app that actually deep link out to other apps. So you type in where you want to go. You can take the train there or public transport. You can walk there. You can hitchhike, bike there, or finally you can ride share there with Uber or Lyft or whatever you want to use. At this point, I encourage you to start thinking about the deals you could broker for your own app if it makes sense to be inside someone else's app. Not necessarily a competitor, but someone that has their app installed in a wider base than your own. Of course, once in Uber, the origin and destination are filled in, and your driver's moments away, and it's pretty cool. And I do this more often than I should. So let's go over some code examples. I know I set the talk to 100 level talk, so the code is going to be fairly high level and simple enough for the muggles in the room to understand. So this is how deep linking works with URLs. It looks the same way as Mail.to, really. So you have this, effectively your app scheme or your app protocol. So it just says my app, but it could be FB or Twitter for Facebook or Twitter. And then we tend to use the get syntax. So parameter name and parameter value. And that sort of structures it for readability and ease of parsing. And so then your app responds to that. So on iOS, you register your application in your application's plist file. You allow responding to certain URL schemes. So my app would change to whatever your app's name is. And then your application and your application delegate will get this method called classic Objective-C style application your open URL options. And then you'll get those options out, you'll parse your parameters, and then you'll instantiate and present the correct view controller with the right data in it. So say if you had to add something to cart, you'd instantiate your cart view controller, present it, and all the shoes that you put in the cart will be in the cart. Then you return yes to tell them that you can in fact deal with that URL. On Android, you use your app's manifest file, like you do with everything for Android, and that'll declare what schemes you want to launch with your activities. So we see here the scheme my app, that basically ties the URL to a given activity. So once inside the activity, you can query the launching intent to get the data out, and then you can even launch further intents from there to go to the right screen, or do whatever you like. In Windows 10, you take a similar approach by extending your app's manifest file, and then in your onActivated method, you once again parse the parameters, instantiate the right view, and go to it. Pretty straightforward. I believe that with deep linking, copy and paste will be a thing of the past. There's always been a pain to copy and paste between apps on mobile devices. Like iOS didn't even ship with copy and paste in the first version. Jailbreakers fixed that. But even like between two iPhones, or your iPhone and your iPad, or your iPad and your Mac, or your Android and your Mac, it's a pain. So I think deep linking and universal linking will ultimately fix this and remove the need for copying data that you need from one app into another app. They should always be linked because it should always make sense. I have a street address here. I should always be able to go to a Maps application with that street address. What else would you need a street address for? I should be able to take that bit of data and flick it in a message to someone. So that's deep linking. Linking apps that make sense together. It's an interesting way to let your apps be launched by other apps, and it's a good way to link apps that make sense together. If you take the time to support deep linking inside your app, write the code that parses out the URL parameters and instantiates the right view, and then put it on some public documentation somewhere, you're off to a great start. But then you really need to be starting to build some key partnerships with other vendors in order to get your app available to be launched by their app. Once that's happening, the user base growth just happens. So usebutton.com is a great place to start for that. It's a friend startup based in New York, and they basically let you put ads like Uber in Google Maps for you. So you give them the documentation, and they basically create a marketplace around that. It's pretty cool. So the next big way to get into your app, and perhaps could be thought of as a variant of deep linking, is something we call share extensions. So what's a share extension? So say if I'm reading an article in Medium, and I want to do something with the article, huzzah, a share extension. From here, I presented with a list of options to share to Facebook, Twitter, Messenger, Notes, reading lists, that sort of stuff. So I can take the article and I can share it to Twitter. I get access to the pretty built-in system display of Twitter, so I can set my location. I get a little thumbnail preview. I can tap post, cancel. I get a little character count there as standard on Twitter. I can share it to Facebook. Once again, pretty standard system UI, but here I can set the audience because that's specific to Facebook. The character count's gone because I don't have one. And once again, preview, that sort of stuff. In fact, I can share it to anywhere that has an app installed on my phone. So, mail, messages, Facebook, Notes, LinkedIn, Twitter, Flickr, whatever makes sense. You'll see the native sheet appear, and you don't have to leave the app. So you can keep reading on Medium and do whatever you like. Your app can respond to the operating system when it says who can share this data, and you can say, I support these bits of data. So links, images, arbitrary data, strings or text, and URLs. So it might make sense for you to share photos, but not URLs. It depends what makes sense in the context of your app. And when I say sharing, I don't just mean social media sharing. I mean literally any arbitrary communication back and forth between one app and another. So for example, here's part of joining a new team on the Slack iOS app. Here I have to fill in a field with my email address and password to log into the team. That's a pain in the ass. So I can actually open up one password, which is my password manager, and I can paste in the username and password securely, quickly, easily. That's pretty cool. So how do we actually do this in code? In Xcode, you get this nice set of extensions. in the extension template menu. Here I've selected share extensions. The other ones I talked about today will be in here as well. So you do that. Inside, all that bloated code they generate for you is basically this one method you need to fill in. Obviously, it's not going to be 3 lines, but this is what happens when the user taps post. You make a post to your third-party service, and then you inform the user of success or failure. It's worth noting that you actually write this code inside your app's code. You create a new target for it, but essentially you can then call back into other dependencies, such as your networking or API layer, or any other code you need to expose to that little extension. On Android, you work with intents, similar to the way we did deep linking. Basically, your intent fires, and you can determine, was this started by an easy share extension, which is like the equivalent to the iOS one I've just shown you. And once it happens, you can then present the UI you need to actually finish off the sharing. If you don't need UI, you can just use a plain old service and consider an activity and just do it in the background. On Windows Phone, sort of similar. You specify the capabilities to the Share Picker extension in the operating system. You register your extension once you've actually built it, and then you will get launched on Navigator 2, and then you map that launch URI. It's basically deep linking all over again, and then you just handle it as you would expect. So that's share extensions. A great way to offer your app to do work for another app, thereby capturing the data and the usage and of your service. It offers a lot of convenience to your users, as they don't need to leave the app they're in, and they are capable of achieving better workflows with their data because of it. So if your app can support it, please consider creating a share extension. So the next thing I want to talk about is interactive notifications. So interactive notifications have been around a while in iOS, Android, Windows Phone, but Windows 10 and iOS 10 have kicked it up a notch significantly. The notifications now allow for images, videos, animated GIFs, which are very important for millennials, and they also allow input such as buttons and like text fields, and depending on the platform, even like arbitrary views with your own UI components. So here's an example of iOS's calendar app. The notification here is interactive rich notification. So the content is displayed inside the content. So this is like a calendar reminder, and the content's displayed inside the context of the user's day, which is super important. Basically, if you sent this as a plain push notification and just say you have a reminder for the design meeting, you wouldn't really know, like, do I have a conflict at that time? Is that going to run into lunch? Am I finished before that? This person has a reasonably free morning, which is good. But with that rich sort of information, you can actually display a lot more like actual information to the user than just the plain text push notification. The interactivity of this notification comes onto the snooze button. So the snooze button will activate code inside your app. The code can either run in the background, or it can optionally force the app to launch, and it can run with or without authentication. So here's another example of TweetBot. So it's a Twitter client I use for iOS. As you can see, there's 3 sensible actions suggested with this Twitter client: reply, like a tweet as a tweet's coming in. And these are common actions on any tweet if you use Twitter. Clicking like will not open the app. It'll just do it in the background. But if you need to reply or retweet, that'll require authentication, because that's now writing information to your Twitter timeline. Pretty neat. So here's an example of how you can do a text input to reply to notifications. So once again, this is TweetBot, but you can imagine this being used inside a messaging app or any app that you can provide some sort of text reply to when new information comes in. So these features are now on Windows 10. Once again, it's in the corner of everything on Windows 10. So everywhere that Windows 10 is, because it's awesome like that. So once again, arbitrary views, text, buttons, that sort of stuff. On Android, I don't know if I'm saying it, but Android, being Android, has had this for ages. So yeah, on Android, you kind of build your own notifications. So up to you what you want to do. So once again, I'll go over briefly the implementations. Push is one of these notoriously hard things. It's one of the things I do a lot as a job. I do a lot of our pre-sales and implementation work, so I set this up with Fortune 500 companies like on the daily. So I'm not going to go into that in this talk, because it's another 2-hour talk of its own. But conceptually, in iOS 10, you register for scenarios at your app launch. So scenarios effectively like things like, oh, a calendar reminder versus calendar invite versus new tweet versus new like. So these scenarios happen inside your app, and with each scenario, you can give a set of actions that make sense for that scenario. Then you send a notification, either locally or from your server, and then in iOS 10, you can have 2 extensions. You can get one extension, which is called a notification service extension, which lets you, your code is called before the alert is shown to the user, so that gives you time to download and get the app ready, download more state, attachments, that sort of stuff. And then there's a notification content extension, which is how you present those arbitrary views like we saw in the calendar one. And then, of course, for the fifth point, you handle the input and any buttons pressed with the notification in a different bit of code. So yeah, lots to unpack there, but that's a high-level overview of that. On Android, you basically jump into your app manifest file, you register a GCM receiver or an FCM receiver now with Firebase. You basically say, for this notification, I want to launch this activity or create this intent. And so once inside the intent or the service, typically service, you build the UI. So yeah, actually, typically activity, you build the UI. And in that UI, you handle what happens when the buttons are pressed, any sort of view, any sort of formatting, that sort of stuff. And of course, since you're presenting it, that happens before it gets presented to the user. The operating system actually does nothing for you when a push comes in, which is quite interesting. In Windows Phone 10, you define the structure of your alert in standard XML, and then when the notification arrives, certain tags are swapped out with the content, and then of course you just handle the button presses as you'd expect. So that's interactive notification. It's a great way to let your users react to new information without often having to open the app. By now, you should start to see that a lot is possible without opening your app inside these sort of extensions. So on to the next big feature of the future of apps, widgets. Widgets are nothing new, but I do believe, thanks to Apple, developers and designers are starting to actually get that these are a thing. They've been on Android for quite some time, Windows kinda. But I believe the 2 benefits for widgets are quick actions and valuable information, quick, insightful, to-the-point information. So the Swarm app, sorry to keep picking on them, but they've made an awesome app, allows you to check into places just from swiping down or to the left on your iOS device, and you can press these buttons to attach a photo, check in people, and type a status. Another example of quick actions on Chrome, you can start a new tab or start a new voice search. On your phone app, you can speed dial people that are important to you, and you can get valuable information. So obviously calendars, reminders, weather, and stocks. You can see that the weather's terrible in Wellington, it's windy, no surprises there. Calendar, you can see that you've got nothing on. Reminders, you're up to date, and the Apple stock is tanking a little bit, but so is Google, so it all evens out. More valuable information, buses, that sort of stuff, public transport, very obvious example, but I can see that for my nearest stop, these are the buses coming up. The information doesn't have to be that valuable. For example, I've got the IMDb extension installed, which tells me which celebrities were born today. Doesn't have to be that serious, but once again, information to the right people. And of course, you can tap to see who else is born today. These will show you the most famous 4. So widgets are nothing new for Android, and I've always been rather impressed by the capabilities of them. Obviously in Drive, you can upload new stuff, you can play and pause your music, you can start taking notes, and we can just wake up Google and tell her to do something. Windows 10, it's basically live tiles, which is capable of actually very good interactive information display, and I'll get onto that a little bit later, but it doesn't actually let you do much interactivity in terms of buttons within inside the live tiles for now. But once again, the point here is key valuable information, so if it's the weather, or a new email, or a calendar appointment, this is still valuable information that your user needs to know without having to jump into your app. So how do you actually make some widgets? In iOS, you use that extensions framework. You make a new Today widget extension. You implement the required methods for updating, presenting information to users, that sort of stuff. You can actually get a full storyboard access when you're doing this. So you can actually lay out stuff with auto layout for different screen sizes and whatnot. You are allowed to do interaction, which is not allowed in interactive notifications. And worth noting that the user can actually turn off and on your notifications at their will. So there's actually no way of knowing if it's being currently displayed. But you've got to be ready to react to that if it is turned on again. On Android, what I've written here, basically, you add the widget to the manifest. Once again, a widget is just an activity, and the activity does all the work for you. On Windows 10 Mobile, you basically get a tile created for you when you make a new project, and then you can customize the iconography, the tiles, the splash screens, and even push notifications can replace the live tile content as well. Now in Windows 10, which is super cool, you can actually put out rows and columns inside your Windows Live tiles. And I'm obviously a bit of an Apple guy, surprise, surprise. And I was pretty jealous reading over these docs, like we get a square, yay, for our icon. But Windows does some cool stuff with their Live tiles. So that's widgets. Widgets are nothing new, but I do really believe that we're starting to see the value. Once again, quick information, quick actions. Both can bring such great value to your users that you really should start thinking about implementing these inside your app. And as soon as possible. Once again, it has to make sense for your app. Don't just make one for the sake of making one. If you can see some value, you reduce your feature set to just a small line of buttons or text, please do. It is kind of heartbreaking as a developer to be like, oh, actually my app is just these 2 buttons, and just putting that inside a widget, but we should get over ourselves and try to do that. The next up is voice assistants. On most phones now, you can say something special, and it'll wake up a voice assistant on your phone. So with Apple, obviously the famous one, Siri, she or he, depending on what voice you have set, is capable of many tasks. Dumb questions, reminders, calendars, read you out stuff, change your song, and has recently, as of macOS Sierra, has come to the desktop. So it's quite cool to welcome Siri to the desktop. In Microsoft land, you have Cortana, which is pretty much the same as Siri. It's also found on the desktop and Xbox, and if you're in the US, it's also available as an iPhone and Android app. But once again, it's not baked into the operating system, so on Windows 10, she's just there and incredibly useful. It's also worth noting that you can actually type to Cortana as well, which saves you having to use an American accent sometimes. Don't like doing that. And finally, Android land, you get OK Google, cleverly called what you have to say to open it. Can do a lot. It's also found in most Google apps, so on any platform. So you can search basically with voice dictation inside YouTube or Maps and that sort of stuff. Now also available in their chat client, Allo, and capable of booking you movie tickets, restaurants, flights, that sort of stuff. So the question is, do you look silly using voice assistants? Who thinks they look silly? Hands up. Yeah, just talking to their phone or their watch. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say not really anymore. Like, society's changing. It looks silly for me to be using ClickerUp on stage, but you're probably going to get used to it this week. It's becoming more common. According to some latest stats from Google developers forum, 51% of teenagers use voice search every single day. That's 51%. That's half people. And 45% of adults do as well. So it's actually a lot more common than you think. And I think it seems a bit ridiculous here in New Zealand because most of the time it won't work with our accents, especially if you're a mumbling, fast talker like me. But in America, it's a lot more common. So it's starting to not look as weird, and when people, attractive people like Zooey Deschanel do it, it becomes a bit more cooler. So thanks, Apple, for paying her. Yeah, it's they're available holding up your phone, on your watch, Bluetooth headsets, that sort of stuff. But is it efficient? Don't make me talk when I can type. Cortana's great. You can type into it, get the response back. But I really don't want to have to use my American accent to just book a damn flight. Like, I just want to, if you can do it fast with your thumbs, then do it. Don't make your users jump through hoops just because of the novelty of using voice commands. It's really annoying. So increasingly, it's starting to become possible to actually develop extensions to the operating system to allow you to launch your app with the voice assistant. So imagine a person asking to search Trade Me for a sandwich press. They can do that now. Ordering an Uber to the airport can do that now. Booking a hotel can do that now. Just ask Siri, Cortana, or Google, and they'll do it for you. It's pretty cool. So first up, Microsoft has a very nice Cortana Dev Center. It has resources, including links to GitHub. Docs explains the concepts of actions and voice commands and how they differ. Cortana actions use your personal data, with your permission, of course, to build essentially, deep link into your app. Once again, comes back to deep linking. And it will use that to build up your request. So for example, put a 6-inch meatball Subway in my order. The Subway app would launch, it would know your credit card, it would know your local store, and your name for the order, just because that's information your phone knows about. So it can actually fill in the gaps of the request and then send it off to the Subway app. Cortana commands, even more general still, and don't necessarily have to launch your app. Cortana commands, like Cortana in this context, is basically an arbiter or a liaison between your app and the user. So as a developer, you can define a grammar or a sentence structure and expect to see typed or spoken something and then have your app get activated by the Cortana command framework. Yeah. So Google Search supports a few actions for your app that you can register to be a receiver for. These are alarms, communications, fitness, context, such as booking a cab, these kind of context-aware apps, media commands, open apps. Yeah, that's about it. And then once received, you can parse that string. They'll just hand you the string for what the user said, and that can inform your app. Easier said than done, as we know from the talk this morning about voice stuff, machine learning, that sort of stuff, which is quite interesting. So Google makes a massive big statement on their docs, and I want to kind of highlight it and bring it to the foreground today. I think it's really important. So it is the responsibility of each application developer to safeguard their application and minimize surprise to the user. So minimize surprise to the user is really important here. So abiding by this, I think this is what's going to make or break this feature for the general consumer market. If we give our users too many surprises, or if we don't work, we're going to really have a hard time getting the general public to actually start using voice. You all raised your hands earlier when I asked who doesn't use it, and that's because you've had surprises in the past. It's spelt your name wrong, it's misheard you, it hasn't understood your accent, and it's a fundamentally important thing. We've got to put a lot of effort into writing an extension for voice commands, such as smooth. The more times it works, the more trust people have, and it's important for all of us. So think carefully about your sentence structures. Use a diverse team of engineers to actually figure out the way people speak. One dude on a project's not really going to achieve it. You need to get a diverse team behind this and sort of figure out sentence structures. Listen to any foreign English speaker and they'll jump up their words differently because that's how their sentence is structured in their native language. So you've got to just support all this sort of stuff. And then finally, train up your users. Show them examples inside onboarding screens or tutorials, and sort of get them set up for minimal surprises. In iOS 10, Apple introduced Siri Kit. Apple likes to put Kit after things with their names. So Apple's framework is kind of built with this whole ethos in mind, no user surprises. So they won't let you parse the sentence at all. They'll do it all for you on their constantly improving service side of Siri. You basically get to provide your app's name and some other vocab keywords that might suggest it's your app they're talking to. Apple's released just a handful of services for this to work with. So these are like VoIP, messaging, payments, photos, workouts, ride booking, CarPlay if you're a car maker, restaurants if you're a restaurant. You have to work with Apple directly, these things. But once again, the whole theory here is to try to reduce user surprises, and I'm actually super happy with Apple for taking this approach. Call me biased, I don't mind. But I just find it really important. So if you want to start doing this with Apple, you probably just want to get in touch with them, and they'll definitely just give you the resources and support to help you implement inside your app. If you have Uber on your iOS device, I would definitely, after the talk, try ordering Uber home and see how it goes with Siri. It's actually a really nice user experience and no surprises at all. It is, as it always will be, a matter of UX. If we can't do the UX right, we won't do the feature, says Apple. Once again, if you implement any of this new API I've been talking about, you get featured by Apple. So here's Apple featuring some apps that use Hey Siri, and they also had iMessage sticker packs feature launch recently, so they get featured as well. So if Apple releases new stuff, or any company releases new stuff, give it a go. You might get some more downloads than you expect. So that's voice assistance. It's a really cool way to let your users start interacting with your app. Once again, without having to launch your app, but we've got to make sure we do it without any user surprises. So extreme caution while building it, and just really test, get some diverse testers behind it, and just sort of see if it works. So wearables is the next thing I want to talk about. With watch apps, you can extend functionality from your phone to the user's wrist. It's super cool. So this is an Apple Watch. I've got one on. Has anyone tried an Apple Watch here? Has anyone got one? Cool. A couple of hands up. So users install apps on their Apple Watch by syncing it with their iPhone over Bluetooth. In fact, most of the watches I'm about to talk about work that way. Apple provides a notion of a full screen app and then a little tiny text field called a complication. So when you look at like an old school watch, the date label and those little time zone things, they're called complications, which is a very un-Apple word, but that's fine. So at your complication could be like your bank balance, your boarding gate, how many calories you burnt for today, that sort of stuff. So this is the Microsoft Band. It's being discontinued, which is sad, I guess, but I'm actually pretty excited for what comes next. Based on the stuff I've been learning about while researching for this talk and the keynote this morning, I think something super cool is coming. So I'd love to be here at Ignite next year talking about how to build apps for your Microsoft Watch. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Finally, this is Android Wear. So primarily an operating system that manufacturers can use. So the manufacturer can tweak the operating system and release updates whenever they like, and that will work really well. The watch comes in two varieties, square face and circular face. So coding time. Get it? On iOS, you add a WatchOS extension. You basically do the same screen as we saw before. You set up shared resources so your watch can communicate back with your phone app with authentication keys, all that sort of stuff. You do that inside something called an app group or a keychain group. And then you communicate back and forth as you need to. With WatchOS 3, you actually get a bit more work being able to happen on the watch without the phone. Things like workouts, you don't actually take your phone along anymore, that sort of stuff. And then the OS will manage both your phone's battery life and the watch's battery life to poll your host app for updates, but you really have no control over that. So the user's battery will be prioritized over the app readiness. So that's Apple, and that's essentially better for users, which I like. On Android, you basically bundle in an activity. Once again, activity, probably get a picture of activities now for everything. And they just get delivered to your app by syncing it with your Android phone. There's also a mode called ambient mode, which is essentially like an e-ink display type mode on Android Wear. So it can display useful information, but there's no more than 2 colors, and it updates less frequently. So, and they're a bit more standalone. They don't need to be continuously communicating back to the host app in your pocket. So that's wearables, key information and actions on your wrist. Super important stuff. And if you can get valuable data on your wrist, put it there. It's not that hard to edit. So this talk's been a bit mobile focused, so let's talk about desktop for a bit. Since the rebirth of mobile, developers have been crying out for a way to efficiently and effectively share code between the desktop and the mobile. So let's check in with some platforms and see how they're going. So first up, Windows 10, fucking nailing it. As we saw this morning, I can run the same code from TVNZ on a Raspberry Pi through to your phone, through to your Xbox, through to a brand new piece of hardware that's not even been launched yet. So gold standard Windows Phone, hats off, claps to Windows Phone. The other two, not so well. So it's been speculated that we could see some sort of merger between Android and Chrome OS. Obviously, Chromebooks and Chrome OS is killing it in the education space. I used one as a daily driver for about a year at university. Absolutely loved it. And Android is obviously killing it alongside iOS in the mobile market. Sorry, Windows Phone. So they're two really good operating systems, and we'd love to see them merge. I think a lot of us thought that it would happen recently with the Android Pixel announcement. In fact, I got up at 4 a.m. betting my hat on it. Didn't happen, but I think it's coming one day. But for now, you have to write your app twice. Sorry about that. macOS and iOS, something is starting to happen. So there's a case starting to build for a merge between these two things. I've been paying it a little bit close attention. Apple's just released a new file system for writing data to a hard disk, which is quite interesting. In addition to that, in the last few operating systems, they've actually tried to start hiding the files from the users and just using, instead of files and folders to store your information, tags. So you search by tag and just like that's work tag and work meeting demo tag, and they'll service the right file. Developers are pretty sure that AppKit, which is the UI framework foundation for macOS developers, will be replaced by UIKit, the one from the phone. Apple's always had proprietary, or almost always has had proprietary hardware, so there's no hardware vendors to work with. They kind of own and do it all. Perhaps you'll see some sort of dual boot mode. So you'll boot into macOS for consumer work, and then developers will boot into another version for getting shit done. And then with macOS Sierra, we've seen this introduction of a feature called Universal Pasteboard, which basically lets you copy phone from your text and paste it inside a text field on your desktop. This combined with AirDrop and Apple Watch continuity kind of shows that they're sort of caring about completing that flow. So I think something's going to happen there. A convergence between desktop and mobile is happening right under our eyes, and it's going to be interesting to see over the next 2 or 3 years where that's going to go and how that's going to change the development space. So that's desktop. Now I want to take you to something that's actually really interesting. A little bit off the beaten track, but something called Instant Apps. Has anyone heard of Android Instant Apps? A couple of hands, excellent. So coming soon to Android is this thing called Instant Apps. And these are apps that you don't need to install, but instead when you're browsing with the web browser, the page you end up on might prompt you to download a small portion of the app and finish whatever task you're trying to do in the app. So for example, let's say you're buying a pair of shoes. You might be just searching through shoes, and you might hit a button on the website that says, view in detail. So that will actually download a small bit of the shoe brand's app, and you'll be bumped into that app, deep linking. Then inside that app, you'll have raw access to the hardware. So you might be able to see a 3D view of the app, zoom in, rotate the thing. That's something you need kind of raw hardware for. And then you might want to finish the purchase. So, Google Wallet, finish the purchase, done. The little Slither app goes away, and you get bumped into the web browser. Your purchase is complete, that sort of stuff. So you're using just a slither of the original app, and once you're done, it just disappears. I think this is a reasonably amazing leap forward for apps. And it's driven by Google, and I'm pretty excited to see developers refactor their code or restructure their code to provide this kind of slithering mechanism. And it's going to add a lot of value to everyday users, which I'm pretty excited about. But what about other platforms? So I recently wrote up a Medium post on iOS, and you should also all follow me on Medium, because it'll give me the warm fuzzies. And in this post, I postulate that iOS developers are more ready than we think for this. As you've seen in my previous examples, we had this extensions framework, and it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to see an instant app extension. So Apple's already been training us to separate our code into little portions, so we can rely on little portions for this instant app extension. And then Apple's also done a lot of stuff with deep linking and universal links. So with all those in play, we're looking at something pretty cool. So instant apps, coming soon to iOS and Android. I think it's going to be pretty cool. So I want to talk briefly about analytics. So these extensions are great, but they don't really mesh with our current mindset of analytics. So I wrote recently a Medium post, and you should all follow me on Medium, by the way, because it'll give me the warm fuzzies. In this post, I talked about the 3 waves of analytics. So the first wave was downloads. 2009, how many downloads you got? Millions, billions, whatever. But eventually, we've all just worked out you can just buy downloads. They just cost a certain amount. The second wave was monthly active users and time in the app. How long are you spending from app open to app close? Once again, this doesn't really work with the extensions framework. Like if I just look at my watch, how long was that inside the app? So the third wave is events. Your business insights should be driven by events. Focus on the events you worry about, and focus on the events that drive your bottom line. So how often are they happening? Are your new features discoverable? Do your ad campaigns translate into the right events? Join the dots. Are the users making the right sequence of events that you expect? Once again, define the ones that are valuable to use and then measure against those. So events. So that's the future of apps. On your phone, on your wrist. Lots of great new ways to give a great user experience to your customers. Give them the right information and actions at the right time. It's almost a different way that we've been thinking about apps traditionally. Once again, we're not opening and closing the app anymore. We're just using the app anywhere. Start thinking about these techniques inside your own app. And just tweet me if you have any questions, or you just want to get Giapo. I'm keen for both. The thing we must ask ourselves as progression here is, are full-screen apps going away? Well, I think there'll always be a place for apps on your phone for real work, sitting down, writing emails, that sort of stuff. Things that aren't worthy of the desktop, but are still lengthier than these micro-interactions you'll see inside extensions. But now I can do it outside my phones. With instant apps, I didn't even talk about chatbots today, but you know it's a big thing from the keynote this morning. Share extensions, interactive notifications, deep links, widgets. These things that start to happen outside your app. It's also appearing on your watch. Apps are now just on your watch. Can your app be on my watch? Let me know. They can happen on your TV. Awesome. They can happen inside your car with CarPlay, Google Auto, whatever Microsoft's coming out with. Probably something already, I don't know, sorry. Even in the corner of my eye with, HoloLens or Google Glass. And then go to any other session this week and you hear about the Internet of Things. So in your toilet, on your windowsill, on your fridge, inside your toaster, everywhere. Smart restrooms are a thing. It's quite exciting. You'll put your app in every blimmin' glass surface of my house soon. It'll be great. So ultimately, I think we'll start to see the lines blur between where this app actually is. And we'll no longer think of it as an app. So we'll no longer think of Twitter as an app. We'll start to think of it as just a thing. A thing like the air, like the wind, just like oxygen. It'll be a thing. And it'll be there, and we can just use it and interact with it. Ultimately, apps will complete the transition to omnipresent services. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of apps. Fair warning, predictions of the future turn out never to be true. But whatever that next thing is, it is right around the corner. No matter what year you're at Microsoft Ignite, that next thing will change the world. And it arrives so fast, faster than any of us will think. It won't be shocking or startling. We'll just adapt to it. And things will get better like they always have. But whatever that next thing is, I really hope I'm there with all of you to see it. That's my Twitter handle. Let's keep the conversation going. I've been Sam Jarman. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Any questions, if there's time for that? No? Excellent, thank you.